Welcome to the Glam Latte Beauty Podcast. I'm Jamie Walsh, a makeup artist and beauty creator, and I hope you'll join me while we talk about all things relevant to being over 40, including beauty, dating, wellness, and more. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about my Italian dreams. So if you follow me on social media, you already know what's happening. But if you don't, I'm going to take you through a little bit of a journey today. I'm going to give you a backstory. I'm going to bring you up to present day. I'm going to fill you in on everything that's been going on. But first, I'm going to take it back a little bit and fill in the blanks. So going to Europe, it's life-changing. If you haven't been able to travel to Europe, the only way I can explain it is that it's an education that you'll never get from a book. It is, it's the way in which you see the world in relation to yourself. You learn other cultures and you see the world that you grew up in and how very small it is. It helps you to see things through a different set of eyes. It's so much culture and history, and it's amazing. It is amazing. And if you haven't had the chance to do it, I highly recommend, because it will change you for sure. The first time I went to Italy, I was in my 30s. I want to say I was 34 maybe. And while I didn't go to Italy per se, Italy is where my roots are from. But my connection to Europe runs really deep, and I have felt connected to Europe since I was young. And it's a crazy story how I realized that connection, and it wasn't even Italy. I'm like 13, 12, maybe 12, 13, 14, I don't know, whatever age I was going to the mall. Because when we were young, we would go to the mall on a Friday and hang out with our friends there. And they had these magazine kiosks like in the middle of the mall. And I remember being with friends and walking by a magazine kiosk, and it had like magazines, books, comic books, and calendars. And I was walking by, and this calendar caught my eye. And, you know, the calendars are wrapped in plastic, right? So it was like shiny. And on it was a picture of this white building. And it had this like blue dome on it with a cross on the top. So I was like, oh, is that a church? But it was sitting on like a hillside surrounded by the bluest water I had ever seen. And now I'm young, right? And I've never left the country, and the thought hadn't even crossed my mind that there was worlds outside of the US. And I don't know, you don't think about those things when you're young, right? So I was like, where is that? Like, that looks like a magical place. And I bought that calendar with my paper girl money because I used to deliver newspapers. And I brought it home and I flipped through it, and I was like, this is the most beautiful place I've ever seen. And I don't know exactly where it is, but someday I'm going to go there. Someday I will go there. And I hung it on my wall as like, I don't know, a vision board. I mean, I'm a kid. I don't know what that is, but that's what it was to me. I'm like, I'm going to put it on my wall and I'm going to use it to inspire me, and I'm going to go there someday. And then I went about my life. I went about my life and thought really not much of it, you know? And so fast forward, and I'm 34. I go to Europe for the first time. I can remember, like, I went to Paris. I went to a bunch of countries, but I went to Paris, and I remember getting off the train and stepping into the city, like onto the sidewalk, and just looking around and being in utter disbelief that I was here. It had as I grew up, I was like, I want to go to Europe. I want to go to Europe. Like, Europe is the dream. Not South America, not, Fiji. No, it was always Europe. And I was drawn to it. I was like, I need to go there someday. And I had forgotten long about the calendar. So I'm in Paris and I'm like having a pinch me moment, like, am I really here right now? Did I really do this? And to understand, I mean, I came from a blue collar background. My parents were, they didn't have a college education. They had me when they were 18 and 20. They were kids. We lived in apartments most of my childhood. And, then my mom was a single mom, making $5 an hour. We were eating boiled hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. I was the kid who didn't get the things that all the other kids had. I had to go to school with, a paper bag lunch when all my friends got to buy the school lunch and get the pizza on Fridays and whatnot. By the way, in retrospect, I'm glad I didn't eat that pizza, but we were still eating trash food, And so for me to have on my own made it to Europe with no help, like I paid for that with my own money, I was like, I can't believe I did this. I was so proud of myself. And that trip, I savored every minute of it. And it was 2 weeks, and I went to Dublin, I went to London, Paris, and Brussels in Belgium. It was magical, and it was in the winter. I was there in the winter. It was freezing cold. I didn't care. It was just amazing. The architecture and the history, just it's like, I don't know. I'm fascinated by it. I love it so much. I met people. I ended up having a whirlwind French love affair. That's another story for another day, but absolutely magical. So I had gone back to Europe another time. 6 months later, I went to see a aforementioned French love affair person a few months later. And I also went to Amsterdam. I'm back to London again. And then I went home and I went about my life. Later, I went into a master's degree program, and towards the end, when I was going to graduate, or maybe like a semester or two before I was going to graduate, this fellowship came up. And I remember my professor mentioning it to me that there was going to be a fellowship with the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. And it was international crisis reporting, with the Pulitzer Center for International Crisis Reporting. And what it was this organization out of Washington, D.C., and they would give you $3,000 to travel somewhere and return with news reports. Now, I was getting my master's in communications, so, in broadcast journalism. So basically, what you had to do was pitch an idea of something going on in an area of the world that has value to bring back to the US, like a story, and you had to pitch that story. And if you got picked, they would give you $3,000 and send you to that place, and you had to come up with a story. And you had to do, I think it was like 3 written, articles, and then 1 or 2 video news reports where you like voiced over them as if you were like a field reporter. And it's like a publication. So it's like real deal reporting, but they do it for students, to give you an opportunity to get out there and like build a portfolio and, get some experience. And I'm like, oh my God, I would love to do this. And I like racked my brain. Where would I go? How would I get these stories? Because if you don't speak another language, it's going to be real hard to go to that country and get a news report. You don't have a translator, you don't have, and $3,000 wasn't much of a budget because it was going to include my flight and then however long it took me to be there, hotels or Airbnbs or whatever, food, everything. And, I was a I was a master's degree student at the time. So I was like, well, the only country I could think of internationally where the language is English is England. But I'm like, are there crises in England? Like what am I going to report on? That's like, people were going to Africa and reporting on, poverty and like just all kinds of stuff that was like crisis. So I'm like, what am I going to find in the UK? Well, I decided, because I was a personal trainer at the time, what if I went to England and reported on health and obesity in the UK? And I'm like, I don't know, it's worth a shot. So I pitched it. I pitched it to them, and I'm like, I'll never get picked, because this is ridiculous. People are going to Afghanistan and shit. And I'm like, I'll report about people getting fat in the UK. I'll go to London, fuck off for however many weeks. And you know what? I got picked. I got picked, and I could not believe it. But I was thrilled. And I made it a rule when I first went to Europe, my very first Europe trip, that if I go back to Europe, I have to see a new place every time, at least one new place, so that I can decide if I want to go back there and visit that place again. So my first trip, I saw 4 places. My second trip, I went back to 2 of those places, saw an additional 3rd place. And now I was going back again. I was going to London, which I had already been to twice. So I'm like, I need to at least work in one additional like trip. Like, I'm going to be over there. And, inter-Europe flights are very cheap. So I was like, am I going to go to Italy? I'm like, I don't have enough time to go to Italy, because I was only going to be able to go for like 5 days or 6 days. So I was like, where else could I go that I've always wanted to go? I ended up settling on the Greek islands. And I wanted to go to Santorini because it's one that I'd always wanted to go to, but I ended up picking Mykonos. I'm not sure why, but I can't remember exactly the reason why, but I found this beautiful Airbnb. It was €50 a night. It was like an apartment. It had its own terrace with French doors. You opened it up and you just saw the Aegean Sea. You had your own private beach. It was a pretty cool spot. So I was like, all right, Mykonos it is. So I go to London, I do my fellowship, and then I jump over to Mykonos. And one day I walk down to the private beach, and there was like this, how to explain it? It was like a little walkway, and it was like lined with stones. And I mean, this shit is ancient, right? It's just ancient. We got to the bottom, or I was there by myself, by the way. I went on this trip alone. So I get to the bottom of the walkway. It was like a walkway woven down a hill, but it had stone wall around the whole, like lining the whole thing. And you got to the bottom, and there was like a portal. It was like a stone doorway in the middle of, like, there's the beach. And there was like a fence and this stone doorway with this wooden door that opened up to the sand. And it was so old that like you half expected Zeus to come out of the water or something, like Zeus to come down, and like it's old. But as I was walking down this path, I have my camera and I'm like shooting, because at the time I still do. I have a blog, and I actually have blog post of this entire trip, and I have a YouTube video of the trip as well, because, I was doing YouTube at the time as well. So I was getting content, pictures and whatever. So I'm walking down the path, and I turn and look, and I just stop dead in my tracks, because there before me is the white building with the blue dome and the cross on the top. And in that moment, it was like something out of a movie, where I just, like, in my mind, flash back to being that little girl, seeing that calendar, putting it on the wall and saying, I'm going to go there someday. I hadn't thought about it since then. And all of a sudden, here I am, unbeknownst to me, at that place. Dude, it was like a moment that like core memory moment. I cried. I like cried like a baby. I was like, I cannot believe this. Another moment in my life where I just was very, very proud of myself. I don't know if I have a lot of those, but that was definitely one. So that was just another thing, like another connection, like a deep connection that I had with Europe. And I decided after that trip, I'm going to live there. I need to live in Europe. Actually, I think I decided that after my second Paris trip because I love Paris and I looked into moving there. But it was so much red tape and it was so difficult to do and I didn't know how I was going to do it and how was I going to make money, and I just shelved it. But after that trip to Greece, I was like, no, I will move to Europe someday. And I was like, if I manifested as a little girl coming here right now and being in this place, then I can do it to live in Europe. So once again, I go back home and I go about my life. Fast forward many years and we have COVID. And during COVID, I don't know if I was watching a YouTube video or something. I caught a video talking about getting a citizenship in another country, and that Italy, if you are a descendant of an Italian who came from Italy, then you would have the right to get a citizenship by descent. As soon as I saw that, I was like, what? I've been sitting on a possible citizenship this whole time? So I went down a rabbit hole and I was trying to figure out how to do it, and it's very complex. And, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I was like, I'm definitely gonna do this. And so I started on that journey to figure out what I needed. And there's a lot of documents, and you have to pull records from the depths of time. Like, you need your ancestors' birth certificate. My grandmother was born in like Salerno, Italy, in a tiny village with like hardly any services. Like, how was I gonna get her birth certificate? So so many things happened during the pandemic, and I ended up leaving Las Vegas because that's where I lived at the time, and going to Florida, moving to Florida. So all talk of Italy was shelved at that time because I was about to make a cross country move and I needed to get the fuck out of Vegas. I hated it. So then once again, I go about my life. I had to get settled in Florida, and I have a new home, and I had to, decorate it and get situated and get back to my work life. Fast forward New Year's Eve. It's 2022 going into 2023. So it's December 31st, 2022. My aunt was in the hospital. She had been in a coma for a while. She was getting better, and then she got COVID while in the hospital. And we got the call on New Year's Eve that she had passed away. It was like 9 o'clock at night. So she really didn't have any next of kin. So my mom and I had to clean out her house, and wow, talk about episode of Hoarders. Like, it was horrible. I mean, it's traumatic enough when your relative passed away, but it's a whole nother animal when you're cleaning out their house. Well, her house was full of stuff from 25 years of just not decluttering. I mean, it was horrible. But I'm in her office and I'm digging through a file cabinet full of papers that had just been there for God only knows how long. And I'm just looking through to make sure that there's nothing important. We were looking for a title to her car and just a bunch of stuff. And I stumble upon this envelope, this folder. And I open the folder and I'm reading it. And like, there's a couple of letters in there in Italian to the Italian consulate. And then I'm flipping through and it was like naturalization papers. I open it up. It's my grandmother's certified naturalization document that was pulled from whatever place that you get that from. There was her birth certificates. There was all this stuff. And the letter was to the consulate seeking citizenship. So my aunt had gone through all of the steps that it took to become a citizen, and she had requested the consulate to the consulate to become a citizen. They sent it back to her and said that you need to make an appointment. You can't just send this to us. You need to make an appointment and come in. I don't know whatever happened with it, but every document that I needed, marriage certificates, birth certificates, all of the things were in this folder, handed to me by the universe. Like, here you go. It was crazy. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, if this isn't a sign from the universe that I need to do this, then I don't know what is. Okay, let's do this. So I started going down the rabbit hole once again. In the meantime, I'm like, okay, what is my strategy? I'm going to get citizenship and I'm going to move to Italy. And I was like, all right, well, I don't know if I want to go full time or if I want to just go there part time, maybe part of the year and like live here part of the year. But as time went on, I'm like, I don't like it here, and I don't mean in the US, I just mean in Florida. Like, I live in the middle of nowhere. I have no friends where I live. All my friends are in California. I have no mans because there are no decent men here. I can't really move back to California anytime soon. And I wouldn't be able to own a house in California. And I don't want to go back to apartment life. Like, I just don't want to do that. After you have a house, it's very hard to go back to apartment living. And I struggled with neighbors, and I'm sensitive to noise, and people are just inconsiderate and rude in apartments. And I was like, no, I can't go back to California. So what are my options? So I was like, no, yeah, maybe I'll just go to Italy for part of the year. And, I have dogs. So I'm like, well, I'll just take them with me, like whatever. So I started on that journey. I was like so excited about it. And as I was doing research on YouTube, as one does, I went down a deep dive. I watched every video I could get my hands on. And then I contacted a lawyer and they told me that, and I sent them my documents. They told me that my grandmother's naturalization date was prior to my mother's birth. So my grandmother naturalized. She had one or two kids, and then she naturalized. My mother's the youngest. So my grandmother naturalized, I want to say in 1944. My mother was born in 1957. So because of that, the minute at that time, it doesn't apply anymore, but the minute my grandmother naturalized in Italy, they consider that a broken bloodline. Like, my grandmother renounced her Italian citizenship and the bloodline was now broken. Because in Italy, it doesn't matter where you're born. You're an Italian citizen if you're born by blood. Whereas in the US, if you're born on US soil, you are a citizen. It doesn't work that way in Italy. If I went to Italy and had a baby in Italy, that baby would be a United States citizen, not an Italian. That's just not how they do it. So, because my bloodline is broken, I cannot go, there is no direct path to citizenship. So I was devastated. I was like, oh my God, are you serious? So I was like, well, what are my other options? Well, you can get a visa, and there are a certain amount of visas, like certain kinds of visas you can get. And I really didn't qualify for any of them. And then there was talk about a digital nomad visa. And so I was like, okay. And it wasn't out yet. And, they're still trying to hash out the details. But I'm like, all right, well, if I have to do that, I'll do that. And once it's available. In the meantime, we have the 9180 rule, which means on your U.S. passport, you can go to the Schengen nations. There's 27 Schengen nations, all in Europe. And you are allowed to go into the Schengen countries, and it's a collective. So you're allowed to go in there for 90 days on your U.S. passport. After 90 days, you got to leave for 90 days. At the end of those 90 days, you can come back. You don't necessarily have to go back to your home country, but you have to leave the Schengen countries. So that 90 days applies whether you're in France, Italy, Greece, wherever. So if you're in France for 30 days, Italy for 30 days, and Greece for 30 days, your 90 days is up, you got to leave. And you could go, to Albania or to Croatia or whatever countries were not in Schengen, but like most European countries are in Schengen. So anyway, I was like, all right, I'll just do that. I'll just do the 90 days until I can get a visa. My mom's like, oh, she's going to retire this year. So I'm like, all right, well, why don't we go to Italy? And I got in her head. And one day, I think, what was it, Easter? I think it was Easter. And I went over her house and we had dinner or whatever. And I had in my YouTube rabbit hole that I went down, stumbled upon this channel. And the channel was this Italian company that had created a business model around COVID because they basically helped people buy homes. But when COVID happened, people weren't going in person to buy homes. So they created this like remote purchasing model for expats, for people in the US, in the UK, in Australia, and it was mostly geared towards English speaking people. And the founder of the company lived in the UK for many years, but was born in Italy. So he is, bilingual, and he moved back to Italy and he started this company with his sister. So I went down the rabbit hole watching every video, and it was like a really deep education on how to buy a house in Italy, everything you need, how much does it cost, what is the process. I mean, it was intense. And the guy who created the channel had like he was so cute. He had like such a charismatic personality, and he was just like, you just wanted to be friends with him, So I'm at my mom's house on Easter, and I was like, you got to see this. And I popped it on, and I like watched the videos with her. I'm like, check out this place in Italy. Isn't it beautiful? And like, look what he's saying about, buying a house and how easy it is. And, I let her go down the rabbit hole. And she was hooked, and she started watching the channel and the videos. And then I played another video for her with this guy. Him and his wife retired to Italy, and he was talking about how much cheaper it was, the better health care, how in retirement it's saving him thousands of dollars a year to live in Italy. And he was talking about how he did it. And so I kind of just gave her the information and I let her marinate. And before long, we were talking about buying property in Italy and going there part-time. So we ended up talking about it for a few months, looking at properties. There are websites that you can go and look at, properties that are listed. They don't have like an ALS system like we have in the States, but they do have some websites where people will just list it and it's out there to the public. And so we just searched and we searched and we searched and we searched. Now, this particular company, they deal with Puglia, the Puglia region specifically. And as we were looking at the prices across Italy, it was very clear that Puglia was one of the more affordable places. And my mother had kind of drawn a line in the sand about the weather. She doesn't want to go anywhere that it snows. Now, if I had my way, we would be going to Tuscany because, it's Tuscany. Do I need to say anything? But we had decided, okay, let's look into this. Let's look into Puglia and this specific area because, one, it's affordable, and two, it's the most similar to Florida that you could get weather-wise. It's a peninsula like Florida. It's surrounded by beautiful, crystal clear ocean. Just a stunning, stunning place. So, yeah, I had this dream to move to Europe. And now that's looking like it's going to be coming true. yet another manifestation. And when I moved to Florida, I would write in my gratitude journal that I was grateful for my home in Italy. For 3 straight years, I wrote that in my gratitude journal every single day, just knowing it was going to happen someday. So now we are working towards home purchase in Italy. And I'm going to do an entire episode about that. What I was thinking about doing is creating a series, the Italian Diaries, sharing the process of how I'm going to get there, what visa or, what path to living there I'm taking, how what that process is like, and the path to purchasing property, and then ultimately what it's like to be there. And I feel like, dating there, it will be, the Italian Dating Diaries instead. And, just share that whole journey with you guys. I thought about maybe I could do a separate podcast, and you guys can let me know what you think about that. Should I do a podcast, just about Italy, or should I keep it a series here and just have it be, another series, just like Dating Diaries or Coffee Talk or whatever? You guys can let me know, but I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it here. I just wanted to share with you guys. I had an Italian dream, and I wanted to kind of take you through like everything that led to this moment. And I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited about it. I just have always felt like, how do I explain? Like one time, one specific memory, I was in London on that fellowship, and I had been out with some friends because I do have friends that live in London. And I think I was on my way to go meet them. And I was walking down the streets of Notting Hill, and just all at once was like overcome with this surge of complete and utter joy. Like I was blissfully happy for no real reason other than the fact that I was there. Just being here. It was electrifying me. I was inspired. I mean, I was there for 3 weeks working, but it was like I could see this life being overseas, and I just loved the history. I went to a cave bar that had been there since like the dawn of time, where it used to be a place where they stored wine barrels for ships, and I was just in utter awe of these types of things, like how long those things had been there. And I don't know, that night in Notting Hill, I was so happy. And the last time I could remember being that happy was when I was in Paris. And the last time before that I could remember being that happy was never. And since that moment in Notting Hill, I hadn't been that happy again until I went to Italy. And I'm going to save the Italy story for another episode, but it's why I know. It's why I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm meant for this. I'm meant to go over there. Am I going over there for the rest of my life? I mean, I have no idea. I don't plan like that. I'm like, when I move, and if you've been listening to this podcast from when I did get up and go to Florida, it was like so fast. It was like I had no plans of moving when the pandemic hit. And the opportunity and conversation came up for me to move in July, and I was moved out, car packed, on the road in August. And I did something similar when I moved from LA to Vegas. It was very fast. The decision was made, and a month later I was gone. And I tend to be that way. I don't get super attached to places. I left Boston at 26 and went out to California and never looked back. California is the one place I do miss. I miss California. I loved California. But I think it was a chapter in my life and, 16 years of a chapter. But it is the closest thing that I feel like is home in the US to me. Other than that, I mean, I already kind of feel like a nomad in a way. So I have no fear about going over there at all. And the US will always be here. And am I going over there full time? Unsure. Unsure. Maybe half time, maybe full time. I don't know. But I'm open to whatever situation unfolds. I'm for the first time in 3 years, really looking forward to the future and what's going to happen. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Living here with, very secluded with no friends and no boyfriends, and it gets lonely. I have my dogs and my mom, but other than that, I work all the time. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are too. I'm excited to take you along this journey. Let me know if you want me to just continue it on this podcast, start a new podcast. I'm doing tons of video content. I've already started a series over on TikTok and Instagram. So Instagram is really short because I get a minute, 30 seconds on the reels, but on TikTok, the videos are going to be longer. And yeah, I hope you guys are into it because I think it's going to be super fun. And that's it. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It was like really fun to share my stories and get into a little bit more personal stuff that I don't get to really talk about on social media on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you in the next one.